Hello and welcome. Whether you're a student of business, a passionate entrepreneur, a brand builder, or simply someone who enjoys a great story, this one's for you. Today, we're going to dive deep into one of the most remarkable business journeys of our time. It's not just a case study, it's a human story. A story about coffee, yes, but also about vision, risk, reinvention, leadership, and heart. You may know the green logo. You may have your regular order. Maybe it's a flat white, a caramel macchiato, or just a simple black coffee. You may even stop by Starbucks without thinking about it, part of your daily rhythm. But behind every cup, behind every storefront, and behind that global success is a story that few people truly know. A story that began not in a boardroom or a venture capital pitch, but in a tiny storefront in Seattle in the early 1970s, run by a few friends who simply loved good coffee. This is the true story of Starbucks, how a local bean shop became a global icon. A journey through bold vision, painful missteps, incredible innovation, and a relentless return to purpose. Let's begin. In the early 1970s, a small storefront opened in Seattle's historic Pike Place Market. It sold roasted whole coffee beans, teas, and coffee-making equipment. There were no lattes, no espresso machines, no cozy armchairs or baristas writing names on cups. It was just a modest store owned by three friends, united by their love for fine coffee. At the time, few could have predicted that this little shop, named Starbucks, would one day become one of the most iconic brands in the world. Today, Starbucks is a global empire with over 35,000 locations in more than 80 countries. Its logo is instantly recognizable. Its drinks are part of morning routines, study sessions, and coffee dates across cultures. But the story of how Starbucks became a symbol of premium coffee and lifestyle is not one of overnight success. It's a story of vision, risk, reinvention, and resilience. At the heart of that transformation is Howard Schultz, the man who saw beyond coffee. Inspired by Italian espresso bars and fueled by the belief that a coffee shop could be a third place between home and work, Schultz took a struggling local chain and reimagined it as a place for community, connection, and comfort. But the path was far from smooth. Along the way, Starbucks faced internal conflicts, aggressive expansions, public scrutiny, and economic downturns that nearly brought the company to its knees. And yet, it came back stronger, again and again. This is not just the story of a coffee company. It is the story of a brand that changed consumer behavior, redefined the retail experience, and created a company culture admired by millions. It's a blueprint of how business, when built on purpose and people, can grow into something far greater than just profit. This is the true story of Starbucks, how a cup of coffee became a global experience. Seattle, 1971, the first roast. In 1971, the scent of roasted coffee beans filled the narrow, rumored cobblestone streets of Seattle's Pike Place Market. Tourists wandered the outdoor stalls, fishmongers tossed salmon through the air, and tucked into a small storefront at 2000 Western Avenue was a modest little shop with an unusual name, Starbucks Coffee, Tea, and Spices. The store didn't sell coffee by the cup. Instead, it offered high-quality, freshly roasted whole beans sourced from around the world. The shelves were lined with burlap sacks of green coffee, wooden barrels of dark roasted beans, and rows of French presses and coffee filters. It was a specialty shop, obscure, niche, almost academic in its approach to coffee. Starbucks was founded by three men, Jerry Baldwin, an English teacher, Zev Siegel, a history teacher, and Gordon Boker, a writer. They weren't businessmen. They weren't even coffee professionals, but they were passionate about good coffee, something that was surprisingly hard to find in America in the 1970s. At the time, most people drank weak instant coffee from supermarket tins. The idea of drinking single-origin beans roasted fresh and brewed by hand was foreign to the average consumer. Inspired by Dutch immigrant and coffee roasting pioneer Alfred Peet, who ran a small shop in Berkeley, California called Peet's Coffee, the trio set out to bring a similar standard to Seattle. Peet mentored them, even supplying their first batches of green beans. They bought a small commercial roaster and began sourcing coffee from Africa, Indonesia, and Latin America. The founders believed coffee should be respected, almost revered, an artisanal product, not a commodity. The early days of Starbucks were humble. The store had no seating, no espresso machines, and no baristas. Customers would walk in, talk to the staff about roast profiles, choose beans by the pound, and go home to grind and brew it themselves. It attracted a small but loyal following, mostly academics, artists, and food purists who appreciated its authenticity and commitment to quality. For Baldwin, Boker, and Siegel, Starbucks was never meant to be a national chain. It was a passion project, a way to introduce people to better coffee and support farmers through ethical sourcing. Their success came slowly. Over the next decade, they opened only a handful of stores in Seattle. Growth was never the goal. They weren't chasing market share. They were creating an experience, quiet, serious, and centered around the bean. But in 1981, something unexpected happened. A young, driven executive named Howard Schultz, working for a Swedish kitchenware company, noticed that Starbucks was ordering an unusually large number of drip coffee machines. Curious, he flew to Seattle to see what this tiny company was doing. When he walked into the store, he was captivated, not just by the aroma, but by the passion behind the counter, the earthy textures of burlap sacks, the deep browns and blacks of the roasts, the reverence for the product. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Schultz was struck by the potential. He saw not just a specialty shop, but a brand waiting to be scaled, a business that could take the Starbucks experience and bring it to the masses. He believed coffee could be more than a morning ritual. It could be a social experience, a part of daily life. The founders were polite but cautious. Starbucks wasn't trying to be mainstream. Schultz, however, couldn't let go of the idea. In 1982, he joined the company as director of retail operations and marketing. He was energetic, full of ideas, and eager to grow. But while the founders were focused on beans, Schultz was thinking bigger: cafes, communities, and conversation. That tension, the contrast between philosophy and ambition, would soon come to define the next chapter in Starbucks' story. From coffee to culture, Schultz's Italian revelation. When Howard Schultz joined Starbucks in 1982, he was stepping into a company that valued tradition more than ambition. The original founders were purists. For them, Starbucks wasn't meant to be flashy or expansive. It was about honoring the bean, selling the best quality coffee, and educating customers on how to brew it at home. They admired Schultz's enthusiasm, but saw him as a marketer in a world that didn't need much marketing. Schultz, however, had other ideas. He saw the lines of customers, the emotional connection people already had with the product, and he couldn't stop thinking about what more Starbucks could be. He began pushing gently, introducing minor retail improvements, suggesting better customer flow in stores, and exploring how to create a richer in-store experience. But he still felt something was missing. That something revealed itself in 1983 on a business trip to Milan. Starbucks had sent Schultz to Italy for a housewares trade show, but it was the coffee bars on every corner that truly captivated him. In Milan, espresso wasn't just a drink, it was a way of life. People stopped at cafes 3, 4, even 5 times a day. They stood at the bar, sipping strong, aromatic shots of espresso served with speed and precision. The baristas knew the customers by name. The cafes felt alive, social, stylish, deeply embedded in the rhythm of the city. Schultz was mesmerized. To him, this was the future of Starbucks, not just selling beans in bags, but creating a place where people could gather, linger, connect. He imagined a Starbucks that wasn't just a store, but a third place, not home, not work, but somewhere in between. A place that offered warmth, community, and consistency. A place that offered more than just caffeine, it offered experience. When Schultz returned to Seattle, he pitched the idea to the founders: transform Starbucks into a cafe-style business, sell drinks in store, create spaces where people could enjoy their coffee in public, not just take it home. The response was cool, respectful, but hesitant. Starbucks wasn't meant to be a restaurant. It wasn't meant to have tables and baristas and steam wands. That wasn't the business model. The clash between vision and tradition had begun. For Schultz, the answer was clear. If Starbucks wouldn't do it, he would. In 1985, with support from a few investors and a burning desire to bring his idea to life, Schultz left Starbucks to start his own company. Il Giornale, named after an Italian newspaper. The concept was everything he had imagined. A stylish espresso bar that served high-quality coffee in a modern, Italian-inspired setting. People could sit, talk, meet friends, or just take a moment to themselves. Il Giornale quickly gained traction. It had the soul of Milan, but the efficiency and polish of American retail. More importantly, it proved Schultz's instincts were right. People were ready for coffee as culture, not just commodity. Back at Starbucks, the original founders had come to a crossroads. They respected Schultz and even supported his venture quietly, but they were beginning to lose momentum. By 1987, they decided it was time to sell the business. Starbucks had 6 stores at the time, and Schultz saw his moment. He rallied investors, many of the same ones who had backed Il Giornale, and raised the money needed to acquire Starbucks for $3.8 million. Just like that, Howard Schultz now owned the company that had once rejected his idea. But he wasn't bitter. He was inspired. He merged Starbucks with Il Giornale, took the Starbucks name forward, and began building his vision at scale. He wanted to combine Italian romance with American possibility, to build not just coffee shops, but an entirely new culture around how people engaged with coffee. By the end of 1987, Starbucks had 17 stores. Howard Schultz had a long road ahead of him, but he was no longer pitching an idea. He was building a movement. Scaling the experience, the first wave of expansion. In 1987, when Howard Schultz officially took ownership of Starbucks, he had 17 stores, a head full of ideas, and one uncompromising belief that people didn't just want coffee, they wanted a place to belong. The Italian cafe model had sparked something deeper than a product concept. Schultz wasn't just building a retail chain, he was building what he believed could become part of American culture. But belief wasn't enough. Now came the hard part, scaling it. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a critical period. Schultz and his growing leadership team had to figure out how to take an experience that felt handcrafted and intimate, like the bars of Milan, and replicate it across dozens, then hundreds of locations without losing its soul. Growth, if not done carefully, could cheapen everything. To prevent that, Schultz made a decision that would define Starbucks' early years. Growth would never come at the expense of values. Every location would follow the same principles: serve premium coffee, create a warm and inviting environment, treat employees, called partners, with dignity, and uphold a consistent brand story. His first bold move? Offer healthcare benefits to all part-time employees, a radical concept in the service industry at the time. To Schultz, it wasn't just a perk, it was a message. You matter. That philosophy became core to Starbucks culture. It helped attract high-quality employees and created loyalty from the ground up. The baristas weren't just staff, they were ambassadors of the brand. At the same time, Starbucks was investing in its supply chain, roasting operations, and store design. Schultz insisted on controlling the entire value chain, from sourcing beans directly through ethical partnerships with farmers, to roasting them in-house, to delivering them through trained staff in beautifully designed stores. And design mattered. Schultz obsessed over the look and feel of each store. Every element, from lighting to music to furniture, was meant to create what he called the third place. Not home, not work, but a meaningful in-between. Starbucks stores didn't just sell coffee. They invited people to stay. By the early 1990s, the results were clear. Customers weren't just buying lattes, they were buying the Starbucks experience. In 1992, just 5 years after Schultz took over, Starbucks had grown to 165 stores and went public on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol SBX. The IPO was modest by today's standards, but it gave Starbucks something invaluable: capital for expansion and a stage to tell its story. Over the next 5 years, Starbucks embarked on an aggressive national rollout, opening stores in major U.S. cities, college towns, airports, and eventually shopping malls. The brand adapted, but never drifted. Even as new locations were added at record pace, Schultz insisted on maintaining the integrity of the original vision. He personally visited stores. He trained managers in company values. He held meetings where frontline employees could speak directly to leadership. And he kept reinforcing one message. Starbucks wasn't just about coffee, it was about connection. And people responded. The green siren logo became a familiar sight in cities from San Francisco to Boston. The cup became a cultural marker, instantly recognizable in movie scenes, on desks in offices, and in the hands of hurried commuters. A Starbucks store wasn't just a stop, it was a symbol. By the late 1990s, Starbucks had become one of the fastest growing brands in America. But Schultz wasn't content. He saw potential beyond the U.S., beyond retail coffee, even beyond physical stores. Starbucks could be a global brand, a lifestyle company. The team began exploring new verticals, branded merchandise, packaged coffee for supermarkets, and strategic partnerships. In 1996, Starbucks opened its first international store in Tokyo, a risky move that turned out to be a major success. By 1999, the company was in the UK, China, the Philippines, and more. Growth was accelerating, but not everyone was convinced it could last. Critics said Starbucks was overreaching, that it would dilute its brand, that no company could scale something as personal as a coffee shop without losing what made it special. But Schultz believed differently. He believed that discipline could scale authenticity, that values could travel as easily as beans, that if Starbucks held fast to what it stood for, customer intimacy, employee care, product excellence, it could grow, even globally, without selling out. And for a time, he was right. By the year 2000, Starbucks had more than 3,500 stores worldwide. Schultz stepped down as CEO, handing the reins to longtime COO Orrin Smith. The company was thriving. Wall Street was happy. Customers were loyal. The dream of making Starbucks a part of people's daily lives had been realized at a scale few thought possible. But what no one fully anticipated was the cost of that scale. In the years ahead, Starbucks would face new challenges: faster competition, market saturation, and the pressure of quarterly expectations. And as growth continued to speed up, the question lingered beneath the surface. Could the company stay true to its soul as it chased the world? Growth, crisis, and a return to purpose. By the year 2000, Starbucks was no longer just a coffee chain. It was a global symbol of modern consumer culture. With over 3,500 stores in more than 15 countries, the company had seemingly accomplished what few others had. It had scaled intimacy. For millions of customers, Starbucks had become part of their daily rhythm. The morning latte, the afternoon break, the evening wind down. Coffee wasn't just a product anymore. It was an experience wrapped in ritual and familiarity. Howard Schultz, who had guided Starbucks from a small regional brand to an international powerhouse, stepped down as CEO that year. He believed the company was in good hands. Orrin Smith, his longtime partner in building the business, would lead the next chapter. Schultz transitioned into the role of chairman, still deeply involved, but no longer steering the ship day to day. At first, the company continued to thrive. Store openings surged, profits soared, and investors cheered. Starbucks expanded into airports, bookstores, grocery aisles, and college campuses. It opened music stores, tested breakfast menus, and explored partnerships with entertainment brands. New countries welcomed the green siren. Growth felt limitless. But somewhere along the way, something subtle and dangerous began to change. In its pursuit of scale, Starbucks had started to shift from a company driven by experience to a company driven by expansion. Stores opened at breakneck speed, often within blocks of each other. The original atmosphere, the handcrafted espresso, the cozy environment, the quiet conversation, was slowly being replaced by efficiency, uniformity, and corporate gloss. Baristas were given timers and checklists. Stores were redesigned to move people faster. Automatic espresso machines were introduced to save time, but they removed the sensory magic, the aroma, the hand-pulled shots, the theater of craft. The third place was becoming just another first stop. Customers noticed. So did critics. Starbucks was starting to feel more like fast food, just with better branding. The numbers kept climbing, but the soul of Starbucks was slipping away. Then came 2007. The global financial crisis hit consumer spending like a tidal wave. As people tightened their budgets, the $4 latte, once a small luxury, became an easy sacrifice. Starbucks, with its premium pricing and rapid expansion, was suddenly exposed. Store traffic declined, sales fell, investor confidence wavered. That year, For the first time in its public history, Starbucks closed more stores than it opened. In early 2008, Starbucks stock price was down nearly 50% from its peak. Customers were leaving. Morale was low. Wall Street was whispering the unthinkable. Had Starbucks grown too fast and lost its way? Howard Schultz couldn't watch from the sidelines any longer. That January, he returned as CEO, not to protect the brand's image, but to rescue its soul. He moved quickly. His first message to employees was both sobering and hopeful. We are not in the coffee business serving people. We are in the people business serving coffee. That wasn't just a slogan. It was a call to realign everything. Schultz paused all new store openings. He closed over 900 underperforming locations. In a bold and unprecedented move, he temporarily shut down all 7,100 U.S.-bound stores tashed on the same day for a 3-hour training session to reteach baristas the lost art of espresso. It was a symbolic reset, a public admission that the company had strayed from its roots. At the same time, Schultz refocused the company on product quality. He brought back the idea of handcrafted beverages. He invested in fair trade coffee sourcing and expanded support for farmers. He challenged teams to innovate again, not with gimmicks, but with purpose. Internally, he re-emphasized company culture. He reconnected with frontline partners, revived the emotional connection between staff and customers, and reminded everyone that Starbucks was never meant to be the biggest. It was meant to be the best. It worked. Slowly, customer trust began to return. Sales stabilized. Employee engagement improved. Starbucks launched new digital initiatives, including mobile payments and a loyalty program that would later become one of the most successful in the industry. The company doubled down on social responsibility, committing to sustainability, ethical sourcing, and community building. By 2010, Starbucks was not only back on solid ground, it was stronger than ever. Schultz had proven that a company could course correct without sacrificing growth, but only if it had the courage to admit it had drifted and the discipline to return to what mattered. It was a rare thing in business, a second turnaround inside the same company, led by the same visionary, and it reminded the world that purpose and profit aren't mutually exclusive, but they must stay in balance. What Starbucks rediscovered during that time wasn't just operational clarity, it rediscovered its reason to exist. Beyond coffee, innovation, expansion, and the future of the brand. As the 2010s began, Starbucks was no longer in survival mode. It had stabilized after its near crisis and emerged with renewed clarity. But Howard Schultz wasn't interested in simply restoring the Starbucks of old. He was focused on evolving the company into something greater than a coffee chain. To move forward, Starbucks had to answer a bold question. What does a coffee company become once it has conquered the coffee market? The answer, for Schultz and his team, lay in transcending the cup. Starbucks would still sell coffee, but it would also sell meaningful experiences, global connection, and a brand philosophy that could stretch far beyond a caffeine fix. The first wave of this reinvention came through technology. As early as 2009, Starbucks had begun experimenting with mobile payments, loyalty apps, and digital ordering. While most retailers were still relying on plastic punch cards, Starbucks launched one of the first widely successful mobile apps in the food and beverage sector. It allowed customers to preload money, earn rewards, and pay with their phones, all while collecting valuable data that could personalize promotions and predict customer behavior. By 2014, over 30% of U.S. in-store transactions were made through the Starbucks app. Soon after, they introduced mobile order and pay, allowing customers to skip lines entirely, a game changer in a busy, convenience-driven world. In just a few years, Starbucks had become not only a coffee leader, but a quiet tech powerhouse. But innovation didn't stop at digital tools. Schultz also began to expand the brand's footprint into entirely new verticals. One bold move came in the form of the Starbucks Reserve Roastery, a multi-story high-end concept store that combined coffee theater, artisanal roasting, immersive storytelling, and even cocktail bars. Launched first in Seattle in 2014 and later in Shanghai, Milan, and New York, the Roastery was Starbucks' answer to the luxury retail experience. It was less about volume and more about wonder. The message was clear. Starbucks wasn't abandoning its coffeehouse roots, it was reimagining them. Simultaneously, the company expanded globally with greater confidence and cultural sensitivity. Now operating in more than 80 countries, Starbucks adapted to local markets while maintaining its core identity. In China, stores featured traditional tea options and localized design. In Japan, shops offered tranquil, zen-like interiors. In India, stores were often larger and more community-focused. And then there was the evolution of purpose. Schultz, deeply shaped by his own working-class upbringing, always believed that business had a moral responsibility. In the 2010s, this belief became more prominent. Starbucks began making bold public stances, offering free college tuition to employees through its partnership with Arizona State University, investing in veterans hiring programs, supporting refugee employment, and promoting fair trade and sustainable sourcing practices across its supply chain. In an era when many companies avoided controversy, Starbucks leaned into it with mixed reactions. The company's Race Together campaign in 2015, which encouraged baristas to engage customers in conversations about race, was widely criticized. But it showed that Starbucks saw itself not just as a business, but as a platform for civic dialogue. Meanwhile, the company kept diversifying its portfolio. It acquired premium tea brand Teavana, later shuttered, expanded its food offerings through La Boulange Bakery, launched ready-to-drink bottled products in partnership with PepsiCo, and explored global delivery via Uber Eats and other platforms. These moves weren't always perfect, but they pointed to a company that was restless, experimental, and unwilling to coast. Leadership, too, began to shift. In 2017, Howard Schultz stepped down, again as CEO, handing the role to Kevin Johnson, a former tech executive from Microsoft and Juniper Networks. Under Johnson, Starbucks doubled down on digital transformation, sustainability, and efficiency, streamlining operations while continuing to open thousands of stores globally, especially in Asia. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck in 2020, Starbucks, like most consumer-facing brands, faced disruption. But thanks to its investment in mobile ordering, drive-through infrastructure, and digital loyalty, it weathered the crisis better than many. The company used the moment to accelerate its pickup store model in urban areas, redesign its cafes, and rethink how connection could still be delivered in a physically distanced world. Through all of this, one truth remained. Starbucks had become more than a coffee company. It had become a brand that people invited into their routines, their homes, even their identities. A logo that symbolized comfort, consistency, and aspiration. A place where baristas knew your name and spelled it wrong on the cup, but somehow that too became part of the charm. From a small storefront in Seattle selling beans by the pound, Starbucks had transformed into a global empire. And yet somehow, its success wasn't just about size. It was about intimacy at scale, a blend of consistency and local flavor, of ritual and reinvention. Starbucks had mastered the art of staying familiar while constantly evolving. And in doing so, it proved something profound, that a company can grow, innovate, adapt, and still hold on to its soul. Lessons from Starbucks: what great brands are really made of. By the time Starbucks entered the 2020s, it had become more than a coffee company, more than a retailer, more than a brand. It had become a cultural institution. Its story was no longer just about espresso or customer experience. It was about reinvention, values, leadership, and the invisible thread that binds people to brands that make them feel something. From a single store in Seattle's Pike Place Market in 1971 to tens of thousands of stores across 6 continents, Starbucks built a business that didn't just sell a product. It sold a ritual, a rhythm, a reason. But what exactly made it work? How did a company that sold a simple commodity coffee turn itself into one of the most iconic, resilient brands in modern history? The answers lie in a handful of lessons. Hard-won, often messy, always human. Todd 1. Vision must be personal. Howard Schultz didn't start Starbucks, but he saw what it could become. His vision wasn't plucked from a spreadsheet. It was born from an emotional experience in an Italian espresso bar. He saw coffee not just as a beverage, but as a bridge between people. Great companies often begin with someone seeing not what is, but what could be, and caring deeply enough to chase that possibility relentlessly. 2. Growth without purpose is emptiness. Starbucks' near collapse in the mid 2000s wasn't caused by competitors, it was caused by itself. In the rush to expand, it diluted its own magic. Automatic machines replaced handcrafted moments. Stores opened faster than the culture could follow. Profit overtook purpose. And yet that moment of crisis became one of the brand's greatest assets because it forced a return to discipline and identity. The real lesson? Growth isn't the enemy, but growth without values, growth that forgets why you started, is a trap. 3. Your people are your brand. From the beginning, Starbucks invested in its partners, offering healthcare, stock options, education benefits, and leadership training to baristas that most companies would treat as disposable. This wasn't charity, it was strategy. When the people behind the counter feel seen, respected, and empowered, they pass that energy on to customers. The experience becomes not just consistent, but human. 4. A brand is a living, breathing story. Starbucks never just sold coffee, it sold a story. That story evolved from quality beans to Italian-style cafes, from community spaces to digital convenience, from social responsibility to global ambition. The logo remained, the identity shifted. The key was that the essence stayed the same: warmth, connection, care. Great brands don't stay static. They listen, adapt, and speak to the moment without losing the melody of who they are. Reinvention is a requirement. Starbucks didn't just reinvent the coffee business. It reinvented itself multiple times. It built cafes before cafes were cool. It became a tech company before most retailers had websites. It invested in sustainability when it was still niche. It experimented, failed, learned, and kept moving. The best businesses aren't married to a model. They're married to a mission, and they find new ways to serve it as the world changes. Leadership requires soul. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Starbucks is this: great leadership is not just about scale or structure, it's about soul. Howard Schultz led not with management theory, but with lived conviction. He cried in shareholder meetings. He closed 7,000 stores for training, not to save money, but to save meaning. He believed that companies should serve more than markets. They should serve people. It's a lesson that feels more relevant now than ever.